Radke back for another episode of the Heart of Rural America podcast, the show where we highlight great people doing inspiring things in their rural communities to make agriculture and this country stronger. Along the dusty trail, I've had the great fortune of meeting today's guest. His name is Doyle Turner. He's a retired fourth generation farmer and cattle feeder and banker from Mobile, Iowa. And in this season of his life, he finds himself in a similar battle to myself, which is fighting for family farms and ranches, fighting for our private property rights, standing up for landowners, and really pushing back against the Green New Deal and a land grab that seeks to fleece taxpayers of their hard-earned money and line the pockets of very few. So, Doyle, does that wrap it up in a nutshell of what we're doing? It's so much bigger than that.
That definitely wraps it up into a nutshell, and this is a very big, rather complex issue. Most of the times you think of a pipeline, and I know my first impression was big deal pipeline. We've got them all over the place. What's the big deal with this one? Well, when I started to do some research, oh, this is not our grandfather's pipeline.
No.
This is a pipeline that runs under a pressure that we've never seen around this area for any pipelines. According to Summit, it runs between 21 and 3100 psi. It But the big part on the safety side of it is it handles something that is an asphyxiant that is heavier than air. So if we have a rupture, it's not going to go straight up like natural gas. It's going to go out and it's going to cover people's land, and you can't see it, you can't smell it, you won't know it's there until either your car dies or you can't breathe anymore.
hmm That's
But
and that's the scary part for me. I'm a mother, and I just think, the other day, it's sad to me that I wish I could shield my kids from this, but yet I'm glad that they're aware and they can see that mom and dad are involved in something that matters and that we're willing to fight for them and protect them. But my daughter quite tearfully said to me the other day, she's like, "Mom, is this pipeline really going to be that close to our house? The current route is within a half mile of where my children sleep." And there's a deep part of me that's really fearful that that's going to happen. And I think, what kind of mother would I be if I stayed here when there's a deadly pipeline that could kill my entire family? But I didn't tell Scarlett that. I just said, Scarlett, what kind of mom do you think I am? And she's like, I think you're a good mom. And I said, I am a good mom and I will fight to the ends of the earth for you. And so my message to Summit Carbon Solutions is it's time to pack up, because mothers like me, parents like you and I, we're not going to allow this to happen. We're not going to put our children and our neighbors in danger for, quite frankly, a boondoggle to produce nothing. A landfill, as you say.
yes, yes, it is. That's all sequestration is just a fancy term for landfill. And it really, as farmers and ranchers, we live in one of the most dangerous industries in the world. We don't just work there, we live there. We raise our children there. And
hmm
I think it should be incumbent on people that when we aren't willing to take this risk, and when you look at the risks that we take every day, that should be a real wake up call to our friends in the cities to say, this is way too risky.
hmm
And you should not, the city shouldn't be taking this risk also.
Well,
Um,
people don't realize how close this is, not just to family farms and rural communities, but it's running close to cities with schools and daycares and nursing homes and hospitals. And this thing could be devastating and deadly, as we've seen with ruptures in Mississippi. I just got it on my news feed today that in Illinois, they had to shut down a valve because there was a leak. I mean, this is not child's play here. And I guess, Doyle, if I hope that the urban listeners will catch this, but if you could tell, the city dwellers that think this is just a farm issue, maybe a misconception or something you really wish they understood, what would that be?
well, I think that really brings me back to the economic side of this. Um, in our states, we are rural agricultural states, and if you look at our successful counties, they add value to everything. And what I'm really preaching to people is this CO2 is a valuable commodity. If you simply put it in the ground, like what Summit is proposing, it is not a commodity. It doesn't serve anybody any good. However, there are things that we can do with this CO2, and I fully expect Summit will do with it in the future. Navigator actually admitted to one of our board of supervisors that eventually all of the CO2 would become methanol.
Hmm.
So, if that's the long term goal, what's the purpose of the pipeline? Well, the real purpose of the pipeline is to create a monopoly so that Summit will own this 98% pure CO2 when the industry standard for CO2 is between 10 and 12%. We really have the holy grail of CO2, and we can put methanol plants right there at the ethanol plant to create methanol out of the CO2. Currently, 1 bushel of corn creates 3 gallons of ethanol, 16 pounds of DDGs, just dried distiller grain. That's what we feed the cattle, and 1 gallon of corn syrup. If we add methanol to this process, we get an additional 2 gallons of methanol out of that same bushel of corn. That's a 66% increase in fuel production, um, just in volume. But the rest of the story is the methanol is more valuable than the ethanol. So it's an even greater percentage by dollar amount. These are the types of things that our local economies need.
Hmm.
Um, the other thing is I was at a meeting last Thursday where Jim Sires actually said that this is free money. It's a gift.
With glacial lakes, by the way.
I'm sorry, yes,
Yeah.
glacial lakes.
Some people might not know. So,
And he actually said this is free money. It's a gift. Well,
mhm,
it's not free. You're asking people to give up their property rights so that these ethanol plants can get something free. And that's what he considers free. If you take the subsidy to this boondoggle, divide it by the total number of bushels used in ethanol, it's a $3.71 subsidy per bushel. So, in other words, ethanol is telling us we can be economically viable if you give us the corn, because that is essentially what corn is worth today. Well, I'm pretty sure that the cattle feeder and the hog feeder and the poultry people and the dairies could say the exact same thing. We could all be very viable if you just give us the corn. This is not going to add economic development. Giving the corn to the ethanol plant and then having them dump the valuable CO2 into a landfill does not create economic development. And they want to talk about subsidy. So currently, by sequestration, they are getting an $85 a ton tax credit for every ton that they sequester. Well, it used to be a tax credit was something you could take off your taxes. Now it's actually a check. They will literally get a check for $85 a ton. And
hmm.
I kind of thought, that's kind of strange. I've sold moldy hay for more than $85 a ton. Why is such a big deal for this $85 a ton? Well, then I found out that in the Inflation Reduction Act, they have such a thing as 45V. V is in victory. And 45V is for hydrogen production. Well, in order to produce this methanol, which according to Navigator, this will all eventually be made into, there is a $3 per kilogram subsidy on all hydrogen production that they mix with the CO2 to make the methanol. That is $3,000 a metric ton subsidy. That's where the real money is in subsidy.
Wow.
So, once again, why would we put the CO2 in a pipeline, ship it off to whatever state, and allow them to reap all this benefit when we can do that right here?
Hmm.
Here in Iowa, we have something of an even bigger advantage on the horizon in that they are exploring for naturally occurring hydrogen. They're doing test wells as we speak, and they have found the geological formations that they are wanting to find marketable hydrogen under the ground. To my knowledge, they have not found marketable hydrogen yet, but there's every indication that it is there. It's a simple case of finding it.
Hmm.
If we have the ability to get naturally occurring hydrogen, Iowa will be basically like Texas when it comes to producing methanol. We will be able to produce the cheapest methanol in the world. Now, if anyone wants to doubt me, you can look at Gevo. Gevo was supposed to build an ethanol plant that in I believe it was Lake Preston,
Yep.
South Dakota, and Gevo was going to buy CO2 off the pipeline. Well, that is proof positive that we don't need a pipeline, because if they're going to buy both corn and they're going to buy CO2, they weren't sequestering anything. So if that's what the new version of the ethanol plants are going to look like, to be quite honest, these ethanol plants that are giving their CO2 away aren't going to be able to compete in the future.
Hmm.
So we may be saving the ethanol industry, but we're going to kill our current, especially small, independently owned ethanol plants who have been duped into giving their CO2 away in
Hmm.
order to lower their carbon index without spending any money, but they'll have the real commodity that has the value they won't have.
You,
Because part of
oh,
the key to what Gevo's doing, everybody talks about SAF,
hmm.
sustainable aviation fuel, and you can make SAF out of ethanol, but you can also make it out of methanol. The simple fact of the matter is the carbon index is much lower for the ethanol made out of the methanol than it is out of the ethanol. So, in order for them to reap all this benefit, they are going to need the CO2 in order to lower the carbon index on the SAF made from the ethanol.
Well, you might find this interesting. Early on, before I really got vocal, and I was still in the stage of studying the issue, but I was definitely on the landowner's side. And I was approached by a proponent of this pipeline wanting to get me on the payroll to help rehabilitate the image of this project and convince the people that this was good for them. And I had told this gentleman, I don't know if you've seen my social media posts, but this project is ridiculous. It is based on the premise of a lie. It is ushering in socialism, it's ushering in the Green New Deal, and it's using tax dollars to produce nothing and put it in a deadly pipeline. Like, I'm not too interested. And one of the things that goes back, the reason I'm telling you this is because at that time early on, I had said, besides, there are so many alternatives coming up. This is going to be outdated, like methanol. And he laughed in my face. And I didn't really understand it at the time until I realized they need this pipeline for their own purposes, their own greed, their own gain. And so, in order to push it through, they have to promote it like it is the only option when we know that's just not true. And I've been saying, I've been called anti agriculture, I've been called a leftist, I've been called an extremist, an environmental activist, I've been called anti ethanol. But the truth is there are so many ways to make money farming and ranching. This isn't it. And
No.
the good producers that are really savvy know that this thing is outdated to begin with. And there is better money, better opportunities on the horizon. So I guess let's talk a little bit about more about those opportunities. What do you see as the future for the corn farmer and maybe the cattle feeder? Like, where are we going? Because I heard Jim Sire say this and it was ridiculous. He said that if we don't embrace this pipeline, that we're going to look like Blockbuster or we're going to look like Budweiser because we didn't listen to the customer. And don't you know, Doyle, that we're supposed to be trying to produce net zero beef and carbon friendly beef? I heard that and I thought, what a ridiculous man, because it's not the consumer that's asking for these things. It is
No.
the government through the Green New Deal using our taxpayer dollars to push these projects forward. It's a pathway to starvation, it's a pathway to producing nothing. So, alternatively, and I think you do such a good job of this, what does the future of agriculture look like if good men and women say no to this boondoggle and really look forward to what advantages are there out there that exist in the marketplace for us to pursue?
Well, I think you bring up a lot of points. I do not like the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm not convinced. It doesn't matter which president we get. I'm not convinced we're going to be able to get rid of it, just like what happened with Obamacare.
Right.
I would love to see it go away. However, we are spending our children's and grandchildren's money here.
Yep.
And if we're going to spend that money, it is really just downright irresponsible to not have anything to show for it.
Right.
So I look at, okay, if we got to live with the Inflation Reduction Act, we have a real opportunity to create another industry. And it
Mhm.
is an industry that, yes, they are. If your goal is to increase subsidies, this industry will actually increase the amount of subsidy. However, it can stand on its own.
Mhm.
Cap CO2 is one of the companies that is looking to do this. They're actually building a pilot plant in Lena, Illinois, as we speak. And he testified to our IUB here in Iowa that yes, the subsidies are nice, but we can make this work without the subsidies.
Mhm.
That should be our goal. I told them at up in Brookings, I said, I have to admire these guys. It takes a lot of courage to come up here and tell farmers and tell the community that your legacy farm can't be viable or your state agriculture can't be viable unless you have a federally subsidized landfill. That takes a lot of courage to say that because these payments are only for 12 years. Then what? Is agriculture done in South Dakota and Iowa? Well,
Yep.
no, we know it's not. And we know that this landfill, I don't know anybody who's gone to a landfill and came home feeling economically viable. It doesn't do that. That's not the process. But I do think the future of agriculture is in adding value. You
Mhm.
know, I don't, I know my state better than yours. One of our wealthiest counties in Iowa is Sioux County. Many South Dakotans have heard of that county. Sioux County sold $2 billion worth of ag products. If you divide that by the number of tillable acres, that's $4,100 per tillable acre. My county, Woodbury County, sold is $850 an acre. We don't even need a comma. You don't make $4,100 an acre selling corn and beans. And we aren't going to be able to bring our next generation in and have viable farming operations on a private scale, on a local independent scale, if we don't add value to what we have.
Mhm.
Our richest Sioux County imports corn. Our poorest county, Monona County, up until this year, their their capital, their county seat was the poorest city in our state, and they have the largest exports. We have to stop exporting raw materials. I like to compare it to Africa and Japan. Africa is the most wealthy country with raw materials. They have more raw materials than any other continent.
Mhm.
Japan has almost no raw materials. Yet, if you add the GDP of all the countries in Africa together, it's only 57% of the GDP of Japan.
Mm.
So that's what it boils down to. We have to, in order to create opportunity, we have to add value to everything. And CO2 is probably one of the easiest things we can add value to.
Absolutely. I know you said it tongue in cheek that it was brave of them to go up and speak about how that was the only way to save the ethanol industry. And I it's been interesting to sit in peer and go testify on bills like SB 201 that we'll be voting on, Referred Law 21. And we absolutely need people to go vote no on that. Uh, but what wasn't brave of the ethanol lobby was to come into a room filled with 250 people there in a committee hearing on a bill and all of a sudden get up there and talk about how they deserve to be able to use eminent domain on other people's land in order to enrich themselves. And what was even more disturbing is to watch the politicians talk about the ethanol industry like it's the golden calf and being willing to trample on the individual farm and ranch families in order to protect one major industry. It was like a slap in the face when I realized, man, these guys, it's not good enough to be subsidized. It's not good enough to get all this handouts. Now they want my land too. So how it's I don't know. It's been really really tough to see that of the I thought there was this mentality in rural America that we take care of our neighbors, we care about each other, that we don't run over the neighbor in order to enrich ourselves. We compete, we run our businesses, but not at the expense of the neighbor. I guess, are you seeing that in Iowa? What's the mentality look like in Iowa?
As far as the mentality with Summit's
The people,
attitude.
the people, the politicians, the players. Yeah. I mean, what's the
So
gridlock like?
the people are dead set against us. We have polls that show between 76 and 80% of the people are opposed to eminent domain for private gain.
Mhm.
We can pass bills in the House all day long to limit this. The people on Summit's payroll are in leadership in the Republican Party in the Senate, and we can't get anywhere in the Senate. And I believe there's a lot of states that are in that shape. I
Mhm.
testified for a bill in the House subcommittee meeting, and Summit testified before I did. And they were literally bragging about the volunteer number of volunteer easements in each one of the senators' districts. One of them was like 70%, one of them was 75. I don't remember the third. And I found it interesting that they weren't bragging about where they have the most easements. Minnesota. They have over 90% voluntary easements in Minnesota. But you know what they don't have in Minnesota? Eminent domain.
Mhm.
So they've got all of those easements. That's more than they've gotten anywhere else without the use of eminent domain.
Mhm.
And a Democrat senator told them, he goes, I hear you talking about the market, but if you would have stayed with the market and stopped trying to take people's land, but rather worked with them and paid them, you would already be building this pipeline.
Yep.
And quite honestly, I believe he is right.
Yep.
The eminent domain is what is killing this project.
Yep.
But it almost seems like it's more important for them to set this precedent than it is the pipeline itself.
It
And it
does.
really makes you wonder what's coming next.
Mhm.
We know hydrogen pipelines are in the works. Hydrogen is going to be harder to beat
Mhm.
because hydrogen is a commodity and it will be more than likely they will be common carriers.
Mhm.
So we have a concerted effort to just take property rights
Mhm.
and write laws that limit local control and limit any true representation that the people have.
Yep.
At least your PUC is elected.
Right.
Mine is appointed. Um,
Scary.
I was I was at your PUC hearing when Summit was denied. And one thing that doesn't come out very often was those members of the PUC specifically told Summit, do not reapply until you have agreements with these counties. And
Mhm.
there for a little while, they went out to the counties and they said, oh, we've turned over a new leaf and we're going to treat you like you're humans now. And that didn't last long. And then they ran to Pier and they decided to change the laws.
They
And I
sued
don't
some
want
counties
South
for the ordinances, by the way, too.
what?
I said they sued some counties for their ordinances, by the way, as
Yeah.
well. Yep.
And I
Yep.
don't want you guys in South Dakota to think you're alone. They tried the exact same thing in Iowa. We had bills. They were nowhere near as organized in Iowa as they were in South Dakota. We were able to defeat them. Senate File 411 was one of the bills that it made it through the Senate and the House killed it.
Mhm.
Actually, Valero was the backer of that bill, and I know the floor chairman Charlie Thompson, and he actually voted for it. And I testified against it, and I'm like, I know Charlie well. I
Yep.
know he's with us. And I'm thinking, what are you doing? Well, I actually found out from a senator what he was up to before he told me, but he changed the wording of the bill so that it actually read what they said it was going to do, and Valero pulled the bill.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, as we get close to the election, I just want to briefly talk about South Dakota's fight, which is this Referred Law 21. And one of the biggest issues of this bill, it's called the Landowner Bill of Rights, but it's really a bill of sale. It reads like an easement agreement that basically Summit presented and the legislators and the governor put their stamp of approval on it. But the most fundamental thing that I want people to know is if this passes, it completely strips away our local control, the ability for counties to do setbacks. Like Sanborn County, where I'm a landowner, has a 1,500-foot setback. That's what the county decided on. It would be overridden. The burden of proof would be on the county to convince the PUC that that was reasonable, instead of being able to pass it at a local level and then the PUC follow the guidance of the communities. So we need a no vote on 21, but I want to briefly read a comment I got on social media yesterday after talking about referred law 21. And it was from a gal in Wisconsin. And she said, "Never ever give up local control, South Dakota. We lost it in 2009 in Wisconsin, and our ag community is currently being rocked because of it. The bill that we passed specifically references green energy and took away all local control from counties and townships and gave it to the state. Mega corporations can pose as merchant developers and use loopholes in the law to get around any protections for local communities. We are now held hostage by three unelected bureaucrats in Madison via the PUC. Unfortunately, these loopholes were instituted under our Republican governor, Scott Walker." And basically, as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, holy cow, this is the exact same playbook that's being played out in South Dakota, and it's going to repeat all across the country, isn't it? I mean, you can speak well to this, bringing this to a broader national issue. If this fight isn't in your backyard yet, it's coming, or it's already happened and you don't even know it.
Exactly.
What is this playbook that's happening that everyone needs to know what it looks like?
So I'm with Free Soil Foundation, and we go across state lines, Kansas, Oklahoma, Iowa, Minnesota, South Dakota, North Dakota, Nebraska. Uh, we're seeing this in all of these states. And I
Hmm.
promise you, we had a lot go on in Iowa. I was completely unaware of. They changed the hazardous liquid pipelines from being under the direction of the Department of Transportation, who actually has the engineers to handle it, to the IUB, which is a much smaller entity. And we have all of this states this is a concerted effort across the entire country,
Hmm.
and our their goal is nefarious. Their goal is to make us inefficient. There
Hmm.
is no possible way when you look at these uh, green energy deals, the vast majority of them are so inefficient, they only survive based on subsidies.
Hmm.
Um, to tell you how subsidized wind energy is, the wind company gets their money back in 9 months. That's how much money, little money, they actually put into it. It's
Hmm.
all federal dollars.
Hmm.
So we have a concerted effort from the federal government. We have a few players that have bought their way into these. I mean, let's face it, Summit wrote this law. Bruce Rastetter, who owns Summit, literally said when the subsidy was $50, he thought that this subsidy would become 85. Well, lo and behold, look what happened. It became 85. So
Hmm.
I have a lot of people say, well, where were these methanol companies? Well, they didn't have a heads up. They didn't write the bill. You know,
Right.
these Summit Navigator, they actually wrote these bills. So they knew what was coming. And so they had to jump to get the contracts with all the ethanol plants. Um, and uh, Summit is actually threatening um, companies that talk to ethanol plants for tertiary interference with a contract. Um, all of these contracts that these ethanol plants have escape clauses. The
Let's talk
first
about that.
escape clause is coming up in December. That's the first company that signed with them. And so Summit is going out and trying to get these ethanol plants to re-sign with them.
Yeah.
My understanding is what they're trying to get them to re-sign now. doesn't have an escape clause. And who in their right mind would sign anything like this without an escape clause?
The devil's surely in the details, isn't it?
It sure is.
It is.
Yes.
And I would imagine some of these ethanol plants would be seriously looking at that escape clause, knowing that the methanol options are paying much more.
They are looking at it, but however, they are desperately afraid of getting sued by Summit.
Yeah,
Why are you doing business with somebody that you're desperately afraid that they're gonna sue you? You know,
exactly.
that what a way to put a gun to your head for the future.
Absolutely. You know what I've been just it gives me a lot of hope in all of this, Doyle, is that looking at this project and seeing how the groundwork has been laid out for a decade, maybe more, that just incrementally they've gotten the right players in place, the right politicians paid off, all the dollars lined up. They've got the media in their hands, they've got the industries captured, they've got the associations captured. But what they did not anticipate in North Dakota and South Dakota and Iowa is they woke up a sleeping giant. And that sleeping giant are farmers and ranchers, multi generational landowners, their community members, their neighbors, their friends, their teachers, their nurses, their doctors, their grandparents, their parents. They're Americans. And this group of Americans may not have the political clout or the prestige or the pull with the right people. We certainly don't have the money, but that sleeping giant has woken up, and we are an adversary that I'm going to guess they're going to wish they never messed with, because we, the people, are not going to roll over. We're not going to quit. We are going to keep coming at them. And it's been a 3.5 year battle so far. That pipeline should have been in the ground 2 years ago, right?
Right,
And it's
right.
like, my message to them is bring it on, because we'll be there. We will be there. And I'm putting all my money, all my chips are in on the little guy, because we don't have quit in our bones, and this is the battle of our lifetime.
Well, I tell people I went up against the 17th largest bank in the country when I was in my 20s. And I thought that was a big deal at the time, but going up against this company is an even bigger deal. We're going up against governments. There are multiple countries that are invested in this. And the
Mhm.
fact that they haven't built this pipeline yet, we should, I promise you, it's easy to get discouraged, but we shouldn't be discouraged because I promise you they are discouraged. You know, from what I can tell, Summit still they have had an equity drive where they raised over a little over $1 billion, but I cannot find any sign that they have actually secured financing for this project.
Mhm.
And
Devo, from
you and
what
I,
I can see, and Lake Preston has packed up the shovels and the
mhm,
equipment and everything, and that was supposed to be quite the feather in the cap of the politicians, with their $15 million gift to get that thing off the ground.
the fact that Summit refused to buy the pipe and is being sued for a contractual penalty for not buying the pipe for this pipeline, that shows that they don't have any confidence in this whatsoever.
Mhm.
And we should, we don't want to get overconfident, but the momentum is on our side.
Mhm.
We are making headway. And I promise you, the other side is wondering how in the world this happened to them.
Mhm.
They thought they were invincible.
Yep. And that's how they treated the people too. That we're
Yes.
in charge and your voice doesn't matter. And I had someone tell me the other day, Amanda, you can't make a difference, right? You might as well just cave. And I think, well, yeah, I can't make a difference. Doyle can't make a difference, but the numbers grow in size every single day. I know it's exhausting. I know it's scary. They do intimidation tactics, they're bullies, they're thugs. And yet when we lock arm in arm, there's a whole lot we can get done. And I would just encourage people to keep spreading the message, keep sharing the truth, keep showing up to these events, because you don't truly know the impact you can make just by standing up, showing up, and paying attention.
Absolutely. And I believe South Dakota, how many incumbents got rolled in the Republican primary?
We sent home 11. We elected some new, fresh crop of good ones that did not or that stand up for landowners. We got rid of some that voted for SB 201. We collected 35,000 signatures to get this terrible bill on the ballot. We have done the grassroots work with literally pennies on the dollar. We've been outspent at every turn, and we were vindicated this summer by the South Dakota Supreme Court ruling unanimously that Summit Carbon Solutions is not a common carrier, it's not a commodity, and they have absolutely no right to survey on people's lands and to use eminent domain for private gain. So I'm emboldened and inspired by all these victories. I know it would not be possible without all of us continually showing up and sticking to this fight. But I know there's much ahead. And I would ask anybody listening to this, wherever you're at in the country, start paying attention. It's happening in your state. Use what's happening here in South Dakota and Iowa and North Dakota as your roadmap, because it's coming. They use the exact same playbook. And if you don't speak up now, your private property rights, your future of your farm and ranch, your kids and grandkids' opportunities to be involved in production agriculture are going to be stripped away and handed to out of state private corporations with the help of politicians who are carrying the water for them. So, Doyle, with just a few minutes left in the show, I know we're going to have you back for a part two because you're a wealth of knowledge. Any parting words for folks listening?
I would just say stay encouraged, get involved. You can go to our website at freesoilfoundation.com, and you can stay abreast on what's going on in multiple states. We currently have lawsuits where I believe we have some of the strongest cases in our state of Iowa, where we are suing our IUB for their miscarriage of justice by granting a provisional permit to Summit under false pretenses, and there are due process errors. There are all sorts of things. So we're a little bit ahead of you in the fact that we're already headed toward the courtroom. But our provisional permit was based on South Dakota and North Dakota. They have to get all the permits in North Dakota and South Dakota in order for them to start building in Iowa. So we are 100% behind you. I just want to say I've always wanted to figure out how to reroute the Big Sioux River down the Little Sioux River so I could be part of South Dakota. But believe me, I am with you every step of the way, and anything we can do to help, we're in.
Well, likewise, it's going to take multiple states banding together. So we're going to keep up the fight in South Dakota, and we're counting on Iowa to do the same.
And vote no on RL 21.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, Doyle, we will see you very soon. We've got an event coming up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where we'll be talking about exactly that. So we'll see you on the Dusty Trail. And thank you so much for keeping up the fight.
Thank you for inviting me, Amanda, and look forward to seeing you in Sioux Falls.